Marcus pulled the envelope from behind the loose brick in the basement wall, his fingers trembling as the paper caught on the jagged edge. The letter was there, exactly where his 7-year-old son had hidden it 3 years ago, sealed with a child's careful print on the front. Dad, Mom said this is important, only for you. He was 52, still wearing the funeral suit on Saturdays without thinking about it. Sarah had been dead for 36 months, and in that time, Marcus had built a life of absence, masquerading as competence. He worked. He packed lunch for Thomas. He attended school meetings. He did not cry where anyone could see. Thomas had stopped asking questions about his mother around month 18. They had reached an unspoken agreement. The house would run smoothly, efficiently, without the friction of grief. Thomas did his homework. Marcus reviewed it. They were a functional machine with a missing part that nobody mentioned. The basement was Marcus's refuge. He came down here after Thomas slept, finding excuses to organize the workbench, to label boxes he would never open, to stand in the space where Sarah had stored the things she couldn't throw away. Old childhood journals, her mother's recipe cards, a box of photographs from before Marcus existed. He had never violated those boxes. That territory belonged to the dead. But now his son had left him a message from that territory, a small conspiracy with his mother that had survived her. Marcus climbed the stairs slowly, the letter still unopened. In the kitchen, he sat at the table where Thomas ate cereal that morning before school, where Marcus had made coffee in the same way he made it every day, dark, too hot, drunk, without really tasting. His hand steadied enough to break the envelope's seal. The handwriting was Thomas's, but the words weren't. His son had written them, yes, but under Sarah's direction, at her instruction, transcribed from something she had told him. Marcus could see the awkward capitalization, the phonetic spellings, Sarah dictating, Thomas writing, the two of them making this thing that would wait in the dark until it was needed. Tell Dad that I know he thinks I don't understand why Mommy had to go. Tell him it wasn't his fault that he couldn't fix her. Tell him Mommy said sometimes people are broken in ways that nobody can see, and it's not about being brave enough or loving enough. She said being sick in your head doesn't go away just because people are good. She said she loved us more than anything, and that was real but also true that she was tired. Tell him this is not a secret, because secrets hurt, and she didn't want him to carry a secret. Tell him she said sorry for being tired. Tell him she loves us and nothing changes that. And I'm supposed to tell him every day, but I forgot a lot of days, so I'm writing it down. Marcus read it 3 times. Then he walked to the sink and gripped the counter until the edge pressed white marks into his palms. For 3 years he had maintained a narrative of accident, a clinical truth he repeated internally. Sarah had taken pills, an overdose. The word itself was a wall he hid behind. He had not permitted the space for what everyone had whispered around the casket, that she had done it deliberately, that the depression that had haunted her since Thomas's infancy had finally become unbearable, that there was culpability somewhere, and he was either responsible for missing the signs or responsible for being the man she couldn't confess to. Thomas came home from school to find his father standing in the kitchen, fully clothed, the letter on the table between them like evidence. "I found your letter," Marcus said. Thomas was 10 now. He wore his school uniform and had his mother's precise mouth. He looked at the letter, then at his father, and something broke open in his face. Not sadness, but relief. A child who had been holding something for too long. "I was supposed to tell you," Thomas said quietly, "but I forgot." Marcus folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. "You didn't forget. You wrote it down. Your mother was smart about that." He turned to his son. "She wanted you to tell me every day that she loved us." "Yeah, but I forgot a lot." "Then we're starting today. That's your job now. You tell me she loved us. And my job is to tell you she was sick, but that wasn't your job to fix. That wasn't anyone's job. You understand?" Thomas nodded. He didn't understand yet. He was 10, but he understood that something had shifted, that his father was talking about the thing that had lived under their roof, like a ghost they had agreed not to see. Marcus ordered pizza that night instead of cooking. He sat with Thomas while they ate and asked him things he had stopped asking 3 years ago. "What did you remember about Mom? What was something funny? What did she use to sing?" Thomas answered haltingly at first, then with more certainty. The stories were small, ordinary. She burned toast. She told jokes with bad punchlines. She sang in the car off-key and loud. By the end of the week, Marcus had removed the box of photographs from the basement. He bought a frame for the picture of Sarah and Thomas in the garden. the one taken 2 weeks before she died. In the photograph, she was smiling at something Thomas said. Her hand was on his shoulder. They looked like people who loved each other, which they were, and that had not been enough, which was also true. He placed the frame on the hallway shelf. 3 weeks later, Marcus found the recipe cards while helping Thomas organize the garage for a school project. They were in a mason jar inside one of Sarah's boxes, index cards in her handwriting, each one annotated with memories instead of measurements. Chocolate chip cookies, Thomas's favorite. Make the dough the night before so he can help me press them flat. Don't overbake. Another, lasagna for Marcus's birthday, the one his mother made. I'm close but not perfect yet. He doesn't say when it's not right, but I see it in his face. Thomas picked one up. What are those? Your mother's recipes, Marcus said, and something in his chest tightened. He had never looked at them before. They had belonged to the untouchable territory. She used to cook a lot. Not really, Thomas said, practical the way children are. She made the same things, pasta, eggs, sometimes chicken. Marcus looked at his son, this small version of accuracy, this boy who would not let sentiment rewrite facts, and understood that Thomas had been watching both of them carefully, that his son had a complete inventory of who they had been, unfiltered by the editing that grief requires. Do you remember what she made? Marcus asked. The cookies, and sometimes this thing with rice and vegetables. And she tried bread once, and it was hard, and we all pretended we liked it. Thomas paused. She was sad about the bread. Sarah had been sad about many things. The bread had been only one of them, maybe not even in the top 10. But sadness about small failures, a burnt dish, a forgotten appointment, a day when she couldn't get out of bed, had been a language Marcus had learned to recognize too late. He had interpreted it as mood, as something that would pass, something that required him to be steady and patient. He had not understood that there were layers to it, weight beneath weight, that the burnt bread was never just the bread. We should make her recipes, Thomas said. He was looking at the cards with genuine curiosity, not nostalgia. Like, actually make them, to see if they work. It was Sunday evening when they started. Marcus pulled out ingredients he hadn't bought in 3 years. Chocolate chips, brown sugar, vanilla. Thomas stood on the step stool they had not taken down from the garage, and they made the dough exactly as Sarah had written it. The boy's hands were small, efficient. He pressed the cookies flat with the bottom of a glass, the way Sarah's notes indicated. They went into the oven. The kitchen filled with that specific smell, butter and sugar caramelizing, and something in Marcus's body recognized it as a signal his mind had learned to ignore. This was what the house had smelled like when Sarah was functional, when the machinery of her life was turning over. When she was still here, Thomas bit into a warm cookie, and his face changed. This is exactly right. Marcus tasted one. It was not exactly right, it was close, but the edges were slightly too crisp, the centers not quite soft enough. Sarah's notes were aspirational, not quite precise, but he looked at his son chewing contentedly and chose not to correct. Your mother had good instincts, Marcus said. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked through the recipes systematically. The lasagna required adjustments. More salt, less garlic. The rice dish was simple enough that they made it twice. The bread they approached more cautiously, and Marcus found himself reading Sarah's note again. I'm close, but not perfect yet. He realized it was not an instruction for future success, but a record of her own internal struggle, a small monument to her awareness that she was always reaching towards something just outside her grasp. Thomas became interested in the process. He wanted to know why certain things mattered, why you had to cream the butter and sugar separately, why some liquids went in at different times. Marcus found himself looking up explanations, understanding the chemistry of baking for the first time in his life, understanding that Sarah had been doing this work carefully, intentionally, that cooking had not been casual for her, but another form of trying. Then the phone call came. Thomas's school. He had been in the bathroom during lunch and hadn't come back. When they found him, he was sitting in a stall crying quietly, refusing to come out. The guidance counselor had called Marcus at work. Could he come pick up his son? Marcus left immediately. In the car, Thomas would not explain. At home, he sat on the couch and eventually said that one of the other kids had made a joke about his mother. Nothing new, kids always did. But today it had landed differently. What did he say? Marcus asked carefully. That she was weak. That people who kill themselves are just weak. Marcus felt something cold move through him. This was the test. This was the moment where the new thing he and Thomas had been building, This small architecture of memory and recipes and shared attention would either hold or collapse. "Your mother was not weak," Marcus said. He sat beside his son. "She was sick. Do you know the difference?" Thomas shook his head. "Weakness is when you can do something, and you don't. Sickness is when you can't do something, even when you want to more than anything. Your mother wanted to be here. She wanted to cook with you. She wanted to see what you would become. The sickness was stronger than the wanting, and that's not weakness. That's tragedy. Those are different things." Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Can I have been a better son? Like if I was better, would she still be here?" Marcus pulled his son close. "No, there was nothing you could do. There was nothing I could do. She was fighting something inside herself that nobody could see, and she lost. That's not about you. That's not about me. That's just what happened." That night, after Thomas slept, Marcus returned to the mason jar of recipe cards. He began to photograph them one by one, printing them on cardstock, making a small collection. He wasn't preserving Sarah's cooking. He was preserving her trying, her reaching, her small notations of effort. He placed the printed cards in a new folder and labeled it clearly, "Mum's Recipes. We're making these together." He left it on Thomas's nightstand. By November, the house had changed in small ways that Marcus would not have predicted. Thomas's homework was still completed, but they now sat together sometimes, not because Marcus was supervising, but because his son would ask him to. The television was quieter. The kitchen was used differently, not efficiently but intentionally, and Marcus had stopped wearing the funeral suit on Saturdays. But the cost was becoming visible. Marcus found himself angry in ways he had not allowed himself to be when everything was compartmentalized. He would be driving to work and suddenly feel rage at Sarah for leaving them, then guilt for the rage, then a hollow sadness that seemed to have no bottom. The emotional machinery he had shut down was coming back online, and it hurt in a way numbness never had. He discovered Sarah's journal in the back of the closet while looking for something Thomas needed. It was leather-bound, expensive, mostly empty. The entries were sporadic and dated across the 7 years of their marriage. He should not have read it. He knew that. But he was alone on a Thursday afternoon, and his hands opened to a page dated 3 weeks before she died. "I told Marcus I needed help. I used the words. I said, I'm struggling. I said, I don't feel right. I said, I need to see someone." He said, "Okay, we'll find someone." He said it the way he says everything now, like he's checking a box. I don't think he believes me. I don't think he thinks I'm really sick. I think he thinks I'm tired or hormonal or going through a phase. I think he's waiting for me to get over it, like it's something that will pass if I just rest enough or eat better or exercise. I can't tell him that I'm scared all the time. I can't tell him that I think about not existing and it feels like a relief. If I tell him that, he'll fix his face in that way he does, that patient expression, and he'll start researching things, and it will all become about managing my problem instead of him understanding that I'm actually drowning. I don't know how to make him see. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed with the journal in his lap. His first instinct was to defend himself. He had offered to help. He had looked into therapists. He had been present. But reading the words, he understood that presence was not the same as seeing, that he had been there physically while being fundamentally absent from the actual terrain of Sarah's suffering. He had treated her depression like a problem to solve rather than a reality to witness. He closed the journal and put it back exactly where he had found it. That Saturday, Thomas asked to visit his mother's grave. They had not been since the funeral. Marcus had avoided it with a clarity that only grief understands, that standing in front of the actual place where her body was buried would make something permanent in a way his mind had been avoiding. They drove in silence. Thomas held a small bouquet he had chosen himself. Purple flowers, nothing fancy. At the grave, the boy stood quietly for a long time. Marcus stood beside him, unable to speak, unable to do anything but be present in the way he was finally learning to do. "I'm mad at her sometimes," Thomas said without looking at Marcus, "for leaving." Marcus felt something in him want to correct this, to explain that she hadn't wanted to leave, that she was sick. But he recognized the impulse as the old one, the need to manage emotions, to explain them away. "That makes sense," Marcus said instead. "I'm mad at her too." "Are you?" Thomas looked at him, and Marcus saw that his son needed permission to feel this, that the father had been teaching the boy that some feelings were not allowed. "Yes," Marcus said, "I'm mad and sad and confused, sometimes all at the same time." They stood at the grave together in the November cold. Marcus did not say anything else. He let his son feel what he felt without trying to reshape it into something more acceptable. That evening, Marcus's father called. He called every 2 weeks, a duty fulfilled, never staying on long. This time he asked how school was going, and Marcus found himself saying, "Thomas is struggling. We both are. We're trying to talk about his mother more. I'm trying to be better about it than I was." His father was quiet. Then he said, "Your mother wanted to try medication once, long before you were born. I told her no. I said it meant something was wrong with her. With us, with our marriage, I was wrong about that. I've been wrong about a lot of things." Marcus had never heard his father say anything like this. His entire life had been built on his father's version of stoicism, that feelings were private, that problems were solved internally, that seeking help was a failure of character. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked. "Because I watched your mother carry things she shouldn't have had to carry alone. And I watched you do the same thing with Sarah. I don't know how to fix that, but I know it starts with saying it out loud." After they hung up, Marcus sat in the quiet house and allowed himself to cry. Not the controlled, private kind of crying he had done in the basement. Real crying. The kind that comes from knowing you failed someone you loved, and that it matters, and that you have to carry it. Thomas found him on the couch an hour later. He didn't ask what was wrong. He sat beside his father, and they sat together in the dark until the moment passed. The next morning Marcus called a therapist. Not for Thomas, though he would eventually, for himself. He made an appointment and kept it. In the office, a woman whose name he would forget asked him about his grief, and he found himself saying, "I'm angry that she left us, and I'm angry that I didn't see how much she was suffering, and I'm terrified that if I had seen it, I couldn't have fixed it anyway." The therapist did not try to make it better, she just nodded and wrote something down. Marcus realized, sitting there, that this was what he had failed to do with Sarah. This simple act of witnessing without trying to solve, of admitting that some things cannot be fixed, only understood. 6 months into therapy, Marcus received an email from the school. Thomas had missed 3 days. When confronted, his son admitted he'd been skipping class, sitting in the library instead, telling his father he was going to school but going nowhere. Marcus felt the familiar cold panic rising, that his son was in trouble, that they were failing, that everything they had built was collapsing. His first instinct was to punish. His second was to fix it, call the school, arrange tutoring, implement consequences. Instead, he sat Thomas down and asked, "What happened?" Thomas wouldn't answer at first. Then he said, "I don't want to be the kid whose mom killed herself, and I don't want to be the kid who cooks recipes from his dead mom's cards like we're some kind of beautiful, sad movie. I just want to be normal, and I can't be normal anymore." Marcus felt something break open in him, not anger but recognition. His son was carrying something impossible, and no amount of talking about it or cooking with him or visiting graves would make the basic fact go away. His mother was dead, and he would have to live in a world where that was true. "I don't think we get to be normal," Marcus said quietly. "I think we get to be real, and being real means sometimes you don't want to be here. Sometimes you want to hide. That's okay, but hiding doesn't work. We know that now." Thomas started crying, and Marcus let him. His son was not a small boy anymore. He was 11 and nearly as tall as his father's shoulders, and he was grieving in the way people grieve when they finally understand that loss is permanent. "I miss her," Thomas said, "and I hate that I miss her, because she chose to leave." "I know," Marcus said. "Both things are true. You can miss her and be angry and confused all at the same time. That's what being human is." They reported Thomas's absence to the school together. Marcus explained briefly that his son had been struggling with grief and that they were working through it. He did not apologize for his son's action, but he acknowledged it. Thomas did community service, 40 hours helping the librarian catalog books, which meant he spent time in the place where he had hidden. The library became less a place of escape and more a place of work, which shifted its meaning. 3 weeks after Thomas returned to regular attendance, Marcus found his son in the kitchen on a Saturday morning. Thomas was making cookies alone, the recipe card in front of him, his hands moving with the muscle memory of repetition. He didn't ask Marcus to help. He was simply doing it, the way someone does something that has become part of their life. Marcus watched from the doorway without announcing himself. He watched his son work, watched him taste the dough, watched him adjust the oven temperature based on experience rather than instruction. This was a boy who was learning to hold his mother's memory not as a wound, but as information, recipes, stories, the simple fact that she had loved him and that her illness was not his fault. When the cookies were cooling, Marcus said, "Those look good." Thomas turned. "They're not as good as when we make them together, but they're okay." "They're better than okay," Marcus said. "They're real." That evening, Marcus made a decision. He pulled out the mason jar of recipe cards and the printed copies he had made. He also retrieved Sarah's journal from the closet, not to read it again, but to do something else. He brought these items to Thomas. "I want you to have these," Marcus said. "The recipes, the journal, everything. They're not sacred, they're not off limits. They're just your mother, and you should have her." Thomas took the jar carefully. He opened the journal and read Sarah's handwriting in silence. Marcus saw his son's face shift, not into sadness, but into something more complex. Recognition, maybe. Understanding that his mother had been a complete person, not just a tragedy. "Can I put my own things in here?" Thomas asked. "Like, can I add recipes I invent? Can I write things down too?" "Yes," Marcus said. "It's yours now. You do what you want with it." Over the summer, Thomas began adding to the journal. He wrote about school, about friends, about the day he finally stopped feeling angry every time someone mentioned his mother. He invented recipes that had nothing to do with Sarah's originals, strange combinations that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. He didn't ask Marcus to help. He was making his own territory, separate from both his parents' grief and their attempt to honor her memory. In August, Marcus's father came to visit. It was the first time in 2 years. He stood in the kitchen while Thomas made lunch. Nothing elaborate, just sandwiches and soup, but made with the same attention he brought to everything now. Marcus's father watched his grandson work, and afterward he said to Marcus, "Sarah would have liked this, seeing him capable like this." Marcus nodded. His father sat at the table, and for the first time in their relationship, they talked about loss without pretending it could be managed or overcome. They talked about regret and failure and the slow work of learning to see people while they were still alive. When his father was leaving, he asked Marcus for one of Thomas's recipes. Marcus laughed and gave him 3, written in Thomas's careful print. His father folded them and put them in his wallet like something precious. The letter, the one Thomas had written under Sarah's instruction 3 years earlier, ended up in a frame beside the photograph of Sarah and Thomas in the garden. Not hidden, not displayed ostentatiously, but present in the hallway where anyone entering the house would eventually see it. Visitors asked about it sometimes, and Marcus would explain briefly. His wife had been sick. She had wanted her son to know it wasn't his fault. She had made sure he would have proof of that. Most people didn't know what to say. Some cried. One woman said, "That's the most loving thing I've ever heard." And Marcus didn't correct her, though he could have. It was love, yes, but it was also desperation. It was a mother trying to protect her son from something she couldn't protect him from. It was imperfect and heartbreaking and real. On what would have been Sarah's 50th birthday, Marcus and Thomas made lasagna together. Thomas had modified the recipe, added mushrooms, used less garlic, made it his own. They ate it in silence that was no longer heavy, just quiet. After dinner, Thomas said, "I think she would like what we're doing." Marcus considered this carefully. "I think she would like that you're living. That's what she wanted most." Thomas nodded and asked if they could make bread next time. Not Sarah's bread, but their own version. Marcus said yes. What was hidden had finally become visible, and in the seeing, something began to heal.